Welcome to the 2017 International Juried Exhibition. There were over 200 photographers who submitted close to 1,300 images from around the country and abroad. This is my fourth CPA competition that I've overseen, and it continues to be a fascinating process as I watch each juror impart their own unique vision in selecting the work. This year's IJE juror, Philip Brookman, carefully considered each image and selected a diverse and compelling body of gallery images that you will enjoy tonight in another separate online selection that's available for viewing on the CPA website. So Philip waded through all of these photographs, and he's here tonight. So we have to give him our appreciation. After Philip's lecture, you're all invited to the gallery where he will reveal and provide a short commentary of his 8 award recipients. And they are 5 honorable mentions will receive $500 each. The third place is $1,000, the second place $2,500, and the first place, we need a drum roll, is going to receive $4,000. All right. This is one of the largest photo competitions internationally, I think, this year. So we have to thank an anonymous sponsor, donor, for submitting or presenting or giving us a lion's share of that award money. An exhibition catalog containing all of the gallery and online images will be available for sale, and we're going to congratulate all the award recipients. And some of them are here, and they'll have name tags on. And as this is one of CPA's main fundraisers, we thank all of the entrants for their support. And this is one of our main fundraisers, and we depend on this income for our events, for hosting our events. So from 1993 to 2014, Philip Brookman was a senior curator of photography and media arts at the Corcoran Gallery of Art, and there he organized exhibitions by celebrated artists such as Edward Mybriggs, Sally Mann, Emmett Gowan, Robert Frank, and Danny Lyon. He is currently the consulting curator, Department of Photographs at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., where he is organizing an exhibition of early work by the photographer and filmmaker Gordon Parks titled Gordon Parks, The New Tide. In addition to all of this, Philip is also a photographer, filmmaker, writer, and editor. So we are so honored to have him as this year's IJE juror. Let's welcome Philip Brookman.
Thank you, Rick, for a wonderful introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And I thought a lot about what I wanted to talk about, and they said, okay, you can talk about anything. Talk about the show, talk about all the work. And I'm going to talk just for a second about how I juried the show. And then I want to talk about the show in the context of my own kind of sensibility. And I think in some ways if you understand that, you'll understand the show a little bit better. So I looked at, I was invited to be the juror for the International Juried Exhibition here. And I love doing projects like this because it gives me a chance to look at a lot of work. And it's not easy. It's actually kind of a complicated set of parameters that goes into making a show like this for me as a curator. And so what I did, they have a very good kind of online system that allows me to look at the photographs that have been submitted, all of them, online. So I could sit in my office at work or at home, which is what I did. And I looked at, I think it's over 1,300 images, which is a lot. I mean, it's a lot to look at and a lot to consider in terms of making an exhibition that has only 45 works in it. So my job was to find 45 pictures out of 1,300 that we'd hang on the wall. So the odds are long and interesting, but the most important thing for me when I organize an exhibition like this, from from a pool of work that had been submitted from all over the place, in this case internationally. The thing for me is that I want to make an exhibition that is coherent in some way. It's not just individual works that I select that are the best works, that I think, the best photographs that I'm going to put on the wall individually. I want to make an exhibition that in some ways is coherent and has, it holds together, it has a kind of sensibility that might reflect my own feelings about photography. And a lot of the work that I do is like that. I have worked as a curator really my entire career. So, I've been doing this a long time, and I've kind of learned how to, how to think through an exhibition that would be visually and thematically and intellectually coherent. And I hope that's what I've been able to do. The selection process is entirely subjective. I'm a curator, and I look at photographs every day. I look at so many pictures all the time, and I'm trained to do it, but it's, in some ways, each project is different, and this one was very different for me. So the other thing I wanted to explain is that when I'm looking at the work, I'm looking at them on a computer screen, and they all, in some ways, look the same. They're the same size. They're flattened out by, the sort of digital experience of looking at them on the screen. And that's different than looking at them in a gallery. So in some ways I have to, in my mind, try to understand or translate those images from the screen to, what becomes an exhibition that people are going to experience in real life and in real time. And so, I hope I've been able to do that in a way that makes sense to you all. You'll see the show, and I'm anxious to talk to all of you about the show and sort of what it meant to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, and how I came to be standing here today from my work as a student when I really started, thinking about exhibitions as a way to communicate ideas to wide audiences. From there to here, it's a long way, 40 years. And I started as a student at the University of California in Santa Cruz, so I'm from California. I started as a student there in 1971, and like a lot of students, I didn't really know what I was going to do. I had no idea. I knew I was interested in art, and so I ended up as a student in College 5, which was the college at UCSC that was more focused on arts and theater, music, etc. So, just turn it up just a little bit. There. Okay, better?
Yes.
Okay. And so, really, the first project that that's too loud. Gonna get it.
Yeah.
So the first project that I worked on as a student was with a class, and a wonderful professor who became kind of a mentor to me, teaching a class in sort of the idea of museums and exhibitions, and our job in this class, this being Santa Cruz and this being 1973 probably at that point. Our job was to organize an exhibition. That's how we did it. And it was an exhibition about American art of the 20s and 30s. And being interested in photography, I was the one who proposed, well, we have to include photographs in this exhibition. And so I actually became, at that point, the curator of the exhibition, and worked with a number of other students in deciding who the artists would be in the exhibition, and all of that. And so of the photographers, I selected to show works by three, as I remember. Man Ray, Dorothy Lang, and Ansel Adams. And so it was my job then to select the works and find them, and I somehow got it in my head. Okay, Ansel Adams, he's not that far away. I can call him up and go see him. And he'll help me select the work to show in the exhibition. I sort of had an idea about it. And that's what I did. So as a 19-year-old or 20-year-old student, probably 19 then, I did come to Carmel and knocked on, rang the bell, and it was an experience that did change my life, I can say that. To have the opportunity to learn about an artist's work directly from that artist, especially someone whose work I respected as much as Ansel Adams, at that time,
I'm sorry, I apologize. You go ahead.
Let's go to sleep.
All right, now I'm going to go back to sleep.
Don't worry.
I promise you we're going to get through this. So anyway, my experience was going, as a nervous young person to meet, the great artist Ansel Adams, and I did that. And actually, I was welcomed by a person who was extraordinary to me as a young person, a teacher, and somebody who, first thing he said was, "You want to see the dark room?" Well, sure. So, in some ways, the rest is history. That was a beginning point to me. And I learned then that one could learn as much or more directly from artists about art and art history as you could learn in the classroom from teachers and looking at slides or digital images now on a screen. And so that's how I became a curator. And in some ways, it was really that simple. I decided that if I'm going to learn about art and become an historian, I'm going to want to be able to call up artists and meet them. And the best way for me then to do that was to organize exhibitions. So I began doing this, and I remember, another artist whose work I really liked was Richard Diebenkorn, who then was living in Santa Monica, Ocean Park. And I proposed to the university, I was still a student then, okay, we're going to organize an exhibition of Richard Diebenkorn's drawings. And so we called him up, and he said, sure. And so I was able to do that, and it became for me a process of always learning and learning something new. And so the opportunity to organize an exhibition like this, I think of it as, it's not just being a juror and selecting 45 works that I bring together, but it's really about organizing an exhibition. And so that for me was an opportunity to learn something new from all of these people internationally who sent work in, and it was really, it was a wonderful experience. So, really the way I went about it was that I went through, looked at everything, and looking at 1,300 pictures on the screen took me a couple of days, and not full time, but it took me a couple of days to kind of absorb the whole thing. So I wanted to look at everything, and also the work came from it came along with artist statements. They were, I think, relatively short. They must have been so little about how long they could be, but I read every statement from all of the different people, probably 400 or 500 people submitted different works. I read what they were about, and so then from that I went through and I sort of cut out half of the work that I didn't feel sort of measured up to what I wanted to do. And then from that point on, I went through many times kind of ranking everything, and came down with 45 works for the exhibition, and about 40 that would be in the online component organized by the center. And so they selected 5 more, because I think at that point I was tired and I didn't want to select all 45. So that's how I went about it. And then I was asked to write a statement, which you can read on the wall, and to select a series of awards, 3 award winners and 5 special awards. And so that's what we're going to see when we go upstairs after my talk. We'll look at the exhibition, I'll be able to present the awards, and then it's open, and we'll leave the exhibition here with Camille. I wanted to talk a little bit about my own work, so that you'll understand what it is that informed my selection. It's easy for me to say, oh, I like this picture because I like the color, I like the composition, I like the technique, I like the subject matter. In some ways, all of those components that make up a picture aren't what interests me. What interests me is, a mix of kind of interaction between an artist, photographer, printmaker, digital magician. I'm using all these terms today because I think just the term photographer doesn't really encompass what photography is anymore. All those pieces that come together, created by the artist, in some ways needs to engage me in a intellectual kind of exercise. And I'm not that interested in one kind of photography or another. I'm really interested in looking for things that I haven't seen before, and looking for things that I feel may have some opportunity to engage everyone else, and engage in such a way that it could maybe change how we think about the world. That to me is really what I'm looking for. So it's not just the beautiful photographs, it's not just something we've all seen before. It's not just the social commentary. It's a combination of all of those things that make up the photograph today, the image, that I have some connection with, and I hope will then convey to the audience who will see the show. And from that, then you will take home a new idea about photography. So I went from the University of California, Santa Cruz. I graduated. I continued working there for a number of years, organizing exhibitions. I was the first director of the Cessna Gallery at UCSC. Worked there for a while, and I worked on a lot of different things. I remember organizing an exhibition of prints by Jasper Johns, project I thought would be really exciting for students then and for the community of Santa Cruz. And it's one of the first times I remember one of my exhibitions got a really bad review from the Santa Cruz newspaper who said, "Who's this guy Jasper Johns? He's not a good artist. All he does is draw numbers." So, you know, that's where I started. Then I went from there to San Diego. I started working more really in community arts, making films, documentary films for public television about art, and working, you know, for example, I worked in the Community Cultural Center, the Centro Cultural de la Raza in San Diego. And I've always been interested in really the accessibility of artists, of works of art to communities. So I really learned a lot working there. I then went to Washington, D.C. And worked at the Washington Project for the Arts, which was an artist-run organization. And that means that artists were also the curators and directed the institution, and half of the members of the board of trustees were also artists. And you know, that was another experience for me. And pretty quickly I learned that the big museums, whether it was the San Diego Museum of Contemporary Art or the Hirshhorn Museum, Smithsonian Museum in Washington, they started to copy what we were doing. I mean, it was a time when museums as such were really interested in you know, kind of expanding the nature of what museums were. Museums weren't any longer kind of temples to art in which we show the past, but museums were places where a community could come together to have a dialogue around issues that are presented by artists who had something to say about the world. And so, you know, I feel like I was sort of, you know, in my element there. And, you know, it was really at the forefront then of a way of thinking about art and exhibitions and museums and community arts that is really, you know, very relevant today. So from there then, I went to work at first the National Gallery of Art. I worked at the National Gallery to organize one exhibition of an artist whose work I had already worked on for a while, Robert Frank. And how many of you are photographers here? So, everybody, almost. So, you know, I mentioned Robert Frank because, you know, it's another photographer who I worked with at UC Santa Cruz, and then also at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, and then at the National Gallery of Art, you know, all in this kind of span of like 15 years. And for me, I had, you know, in some ways, my sensibility as a curator had grown to understand, grown from knocking on the door of Ansel Adams, you know, the great landscape photographer of the 1920s and 1930s, really. That's how I thought of him then. As, you know, from that to the work of Robert Frank, it was a long way to go in some ways for me as a curator to understand and, you know, kind of encompass all of that. And so I worked with the National Gallery of Art on a major kind of archive and exhibition of Robert Frank, and then I was hired at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington as their first curator of photography. What I did there is that I decided to create a new department for the Corcoran, and that was what I called the Department of Photography and Media Arts. I didn't want to think about photography as only prints that you put in boxes and put on the shelf with etchings and other things. I mean, that was then really the model for museums, that photography was considered, photography was new in museums, and it was considered, you know, very much like works on paper. But what I could see is that photographers and contemporary artists were beginning to come together and photography was seen as the foundation for a lot of other things, like video, or installation art, or performance art, and film, and also computer art. This was 1993 when I started working at the Corcoran, and I mean, this is before the kind of networks that we have today. I mean, way before. Just really the beginning of what photography was to become. And so what this gave me was an opportunity to think about photography in new ways, to exhibit video, to exhibit, combinations of performance video, photography, all of that. And work with a mix of extremely well-known artists and up-and-coming young artists, emerging artists, all of that. So I worked at the Corcoran for almost 20 years until it dissolved. And that's what took me to where I am now, which is the National Gallery of Art, along with the Corcoran's collection of photographs. And so all this time, working as a curator, I mean, I think of myself as an historian, an art historian by training, and I'm really interested in this mix of how the social world, culture, politics, sociology, psychology. I'm interested in how all of that comes together to inspire artists to do what they do. And so I think of myself as an historian, an art historian, working across all of those different fields. And also, I'm also an artist, photographer, which in some ways that's how I came to photography. And also a filmmaker. I work with video, and I'm a writer. I write essays, but I also have written fiction. And so now what I want to do, I want to show you a work I did recently. One of my passions has always been an interest in how we look at photographs and what do photographs really mean. A lot of us think that photographs tell the truth about the world. They're documents. They're real. If you photograph something, that's real. And there's an element to that that's very true. I mean, if you photograph an object, that is a picture of that object. But how we read photographs is very different. And so I've always been interested in this kind of intersection between the real world, the world of facts and history, and fiction, and how artists kind of play on that edge between what's real and what's not real, and use the great things about photography and video and film and writing and all of that. People use those things to question what's real and what's not real. I mean, today we hear a lot about fake news and photographs that aren't real and all of this. I mean, and that's something photographers have been thinking about since photography was invented. Is this a work of art, or is it a work of science, or is it a work of fiction, or is it a work of fact? And I've been interested in this kind of, this point at which truth and fiction come together in the world of photographs. I've also been interested in photo books, I've worked with a number of artists, photographers, making books, often books that related to exhibitions. So I worked with Robert Frank, with Danny Lyon, I worked with Jim Goldberg, and others, making books that are this kind of mix of an exhibition catalog and also a photo book that is an artist book. And so I've always had this idea, well, I'm a photographer, I want to make my own book. And so probably about 5 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, I I began to kind of steal time away from my day job and begin to look back on all the photographs I'd made over my life. I mean, I started making photographs when I was 8 years old. Probably a lot of you did also. I kept all the stuff. I mean, I kept the negatives, I kept the prints. I never did much with it. I didn't think of myself as a photographer who should exhibit their work, because I didn't have time, really. And so I decided, not that long ago, that I wanted a reason to go back, look at it all, and to make something that would be, just what I'm talking about, something that would ask an audience to look at the world in a new way. And so I began looking at all my photographs going back, and that was a mix of old family snapshots, postcards, Kodachromes. Some of these words will mean something to those of us who are a certain age and nothing to others. Kodachromes, black and white negatives, film, proof sheets, all of that, which I just stored away. And a lot of the photography I did after I really started working full-time in museums, a lot of what I did is I used my camera as a tool that was like a diary. I used it like I was actually writing notes to myself about my experiences, where I went, who I met, what I did. But I still looked at it like I was making pictures. It wasn't writing a diary, but it was making pictures that somehow would reflect what I was up to. And I did that for a long time, and I just kind of put the pictures away. I made pictures. I started using point-and-shoot cameras, cheap cameras, with color negative film that I could take to the drugstore and develop it really simply and get back those prints, 4x6 prints. Today, digital's similar. You keep all your images, but so I went back through all this stuff that I kept, my diary, and I decided I was going to make a photo book, and that's what I want to show you now, which is the result. So somehow I was able to convince a publisher that I worked with on other books, Steidl Verlag in Göttingen in Germany, maker of what for me was some of the great books made by photographers. I was able to convince them to trust me to make a book, and it came down to I showed Gerhard Steidl a number of times. I showed him pictures, I showed him sort of layouts, ideas, this is what I want, this is what I'm thinking about. And finally I just went there to Germany like over a weekend. And I said, here, this is what I want to do. And I also want to write a story that goes with it. And he said, when do you want to start? So I said, right now. So, that's what got me going on the book that I called Redlands. I'm going to show it to you here on the screen. This is a kind of, this is the publisher's final layout for this book, but I also have a copy here which you can look at. And if you're interested, it's available still through Steidl or through Amazon or whatever. So this book, they're my photographs for the most part, and they are pictures that come from my whole life, from when I started photography and even earlier, and then up through about 1985. And I wanted to make a book that would tell a story, and the story was the kind of hook that would make the pictures in some ways relevant to an audience, to other people. I mean, I could put together pictures like, with my eyes closed. I mean, that's what I do. easy enough, and I thought, well, the pictures are good enough, but I didn't know what it would really mean to people, because it was my diary. And so, I mean, I'd do it for myself. But then, how do I make it relevant? So I decided that with the photographs that I would write a novel, short novel, that is made up of photographs and words, a text. And so I made up a story based on what I know, somewhat my life. It has elements of autobiography to it, but it's not. It was a story that I thought, would be a story that would hold the pictures, and it would also hold as a short novel. So I made up a story, and I called it Redlands, which is, Redlands is a city in Southern California, to the east of Los Angeles. It's sort of like everywhere and nowhere. And I'm not from there. I don't really know much about Redlands, but it's a place that I always thought, I had stopped there numerous times, on my way from LA to the desert to somewhere. And that's what it meant to me. And I thought, well, this is a place where a good story could happen. So I called it Redlands, and I'm going to show it to you now and sort of tell you the story quickly. I have to stop by 5 o'clock. So we're going to get as far as we can through the story. The beginning of my process was that I sequenced the pictures. I edited a group of pictures, about 100 photographs, and I sequenced them, and I knew that I wanted the story to take place in California, in Mexico City, and also in New York. And it was a story that had to do with a kind of, coming together of images that were in some ways ephemeral, and also real life. So it became a kind of coming of age story, and I made this kind of epigram at the beginning, and I didn't put that in until the very end. And it says, "For those who sleep in dust." That comes from, the idea that there's a lot of dust that appears in the images, both in the pictures and words in this short novel. So the book begins with a postcard. It's an image of a ship. These are going to be a little bit low resolution because it's kind of what I'm showing is a publisher's PDF that is used to make sure that everything is finished and correct. And then I had always kept with me this little, it's like a horoscope. I think of it like a fortune, but it's a horoscope that I've kept. It's my horoscope, and it says, though nothing earth-shattering seems to be going on, take photographs anyhow. This helps you recall what happened today, which will be far more remarkable in the light of memory. Now, this was a real horoscope. I think it was in the Washington Post, and you can imagine how I felt when I saw it. It was like, that's perfect. But I kept it for a long time, and I cut it out, and then in some ways I started with that when I started putting this book together. And then I began to combine family snapshots, photographs, postcards, and my own photographs. So the book begins in Redlands, California in 1948. It tells the story of a couple who come together almost by accident after World War II, and they get married, and they have 2 children. Maybe I'll read little bits of this as I go along. And then I also used postcards like this. These were real postcards that I had kept, or that my parents had kept, and I took them back from them. And for example, here I'm giving you clues to something, but not really much. It just says, found this going some old cards, be sending you others for old stamps, it's like little clues. And then I mix in my own photographs that I took over a long period of time. This is from, I'm going to say, 1969 maybe, when I was in high school in Marin County. Then the story moves to Mexico City. The couple's divorced. The man who's a writer moves to Mexico City because he thinks that's a great place to write. He takes with him his son, and the kid grows up there. He learns about life in a very different way. These are photographs I took in Mexico in the 1990s, Mexico City. I also I think of photographs, and I learned this really from a number of people I've worked with, Robert Frank being one. I think of photographs as something that are kind of malleable, something you can tear up, you can draw on, you can paint on them. And going back really a long way, I made a series of photographs that I thought of kind of like postcards, where I would mount the little 4x6 drugstore prints, and then I would write on them or draw on them with oil pastel. I also studied painting, so for me it was kind of part of this process of painting, and kind of mix in what I was learning from all the other artists I was working with at the time. So this is a photograph actually from Santa Cruz, made in, I'm going to say 1978, something like that. The kid's mother, the main character is a kid, his name is Kip, and his mother dies. And then he kind of sets out on this journey to learn about who she was, what's the truth about his mother. They move back to Redlands, and he has a sister, her name is Addie. They have conversations. Together they run away. They go to Los Angeles from Redlands. But they only run away for a day. They have to go back, and they're kids. And in some ways their turnaround comes when they meet a waitress in the cafe they stop in while they're waiting for Dad to drive to LA from Redlands to pick them up. The waitress came by a few minutes later and set down the burger between us. She studied the empty glass, spied the last of the ketchup at the bottom, smiled and picked it up.
More water? Sure, Eddie said. You want mustard with your burger? She looked right at me and pushed the plate across the table. That's for you, little brother. You must be hungry. Come on, share with me, I begged. Addie shook her head. Why did why did she do that to us? Why did she have to die? She seemed fine before we left for Mexico. She helped me get ready to leave. I was sad, but she really cheered me up. I didn't see anything different in her face. She actually seemed happy for the first time in a while. So Kip grows up and he leaves home. His sister disappears. She runs away for real. And Kip goes to Santa Cruz for work. He tries to find work. He ends up in Santa Cruz. He meets a girl. He becomes a photographer, making postcards for a company that makes postcards. He does a lot of kind of odd jobs. He works in the cannery. He works at Woolworths. He makes postcards. And he looks at the world through the lens. His girlfriend starts to ask questions about his life, and it's really through that relationship he starts to learn more and to question his mother and what she had done to him. So, girl's name is Angie. She says to Kip, she never says that she loves you, and she never says anything about Addie. That's the mother. So what are you, a girl detective in some crime novel? Kip says that. Come on, I don't know why they couldn't live together anymore. They didn't love each other. What do you think? A few cars passed, and we could hear the chains of the giant dipper straining as they dragged the coaster cars over the top, followed by adrenaline screams that accompanied our descent to Park Place, the going downhill to Beach Flats in Santa Cruz. And Addie says, Angie says, Kip, did you ever question Addie or think your sister wasn't telling you the truth about something? That's Capitola Beach on the day that Richard Nixon resigned as president. Kip's girlfriend Angie is from Watsonville. I actually had to write a new chapter when we were putting the book together in Germany. It didn't work. I had to push things around a lot. And I actually sat there and I wrote this chapter called Watsonville 1977 in about, overnight. Then we put it in and things worked better. It was a process of real manipulation, bringing together the pictures with this text that I had written. So Kip and his friend Angie, they decide to leave California and they drive east. They go to New York and they stop on the way in Redlands to see Kip's dad. Though he didn't seem lonely, I figured Dad had been mostly alone all this time, lost in his thoughts of a history he couldn't control. He'd moved back to Redlands from Mexico City. Over dinner at the International House of Pancakes, newly remodeled, I sat with Dad and Angie in a favorite booth and reminisced about Mom and Mexico City and how the Giants lost the '62 World Series on Willie McCovey's hardliner right to second base. So close, but no glory for the Giants, and the great number 44 on that day. We'd followed the game, even though we were in Mexico then.
You have 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, I know. I'm watching the clock. I may not hear the end of the story. So I also began to mix in some pages from notebooks that I would keep, like this. And a lot of what I was doing, it had to do with memory as you see them in photographs that are diaristic photographs, but also memory as you can create it in a story. I work from memory. So he questions a lot about his mother. He's really searching for the truth about her. Who was she really? He knows there's some pieces missing. And they go to New York, but they're also looking back. New York on the Lower East Side, 1978, 1979. These are pictures I made there. Picasso's Guernica in the Museum of Modern Art. Dream of the poem found, left behind for only one person to have for a future time. I included dreams in the text, dreams that were real dreams, but also dreams that I made up. And then Angie gets sick of the whole thing. You know, they're struggling in New York, they don't have any money, it's hot, it's the summer, junkie on the stoop is like, you know, making too much racket, playing Rolling Stones songs she can't stand. So she leaves, goes back to LA, and then Kip follows her home. And they end up in San Diego. And Kip's sister, he finds her and they meet up again. And they go to the beach where they had run away to so many years before. And she's been, you know, like a runaway. She's been on the streets in Los Angeles. She's been, you know, like a addicted drug addict. Not really known. I don't say a whole lot about her, but it's bad. And she ends up in the hospital. And at that point, Kip and Angie decide to leave again and go back to New York for real. There's Manhattan in the distance. It's one of my notebooks. And as I said, I include some of the pages from my notebooks, like this one. Image of the gentle wind. And this, I'm not going to read it actually. She's committed to taking risks. You know, I combine these, you know, these pages with tape and writing little drawings I would do. And we end up back in New York City. And at the end, the ending of the book, this is something I really struggled with. I didn't know at all how to end it. And I had the whole thing designed, and it was really finished. And I came home without an ending. I knew I had to write something. And I had ideas, and everything I tried, it was like, kind of lame. So I asked my son, who was at that time in high school, and he was really into sort of pop culture, the 80s. And I said, how should this end? I said, I need something from that time, 1985, what should I do? He said, use the Terminator. Terminator. I hadn't even seen it. But I watched the film and I said, that's perfect. And so I wrote this whole scene at the end that had, that was like a scene in a subway station where these the different things going on. There's like a ballet dancer trying to get some money. And then there's some teenagers that are there waiting for the train. And I'll just read a little bit here. These are the kids who are like punkers in New York then, 1985. Right, said his friend. Skinhead who was tough and looked wasted, semi-built in tight black jeans and a faded tee with the arms cut off to expose a tattoo of a green and red sea serpent winding up his arm toward his neck. He was kneeling on the platform, looking down the tracks for the F train. Like, I care what you're gonna have for breakfast. You better save your money or you'll be hurting like me. Where was the fucking F? The F train. I'm gonna pass out right here. So there's a girl with them, and she says, well, I'm not eating no grilled cheese, said the lone girl in the group with a loopy island accent. Long Island accent. She was tall and dark with frizzy hair, a loose pink tank top, and a brush sticking out of her hip pocket. Strawberry yogurt, that's what I want. I'm going for a real magazine look, the innocent fashion warrior, like that chick Sarah What's-Her-Face in The Terminator. She raised her arms overhead, imitating the ballerina who was trying to raise money by dancing in subway. Imitating the ballerina, and she spun around, tossing a couple of awkward kung fu jabs toward the snake man, shadow boxing him just to keep moving. He was zoned out. As she approached him from behind, she eased her hands over both his ears and pulled his head back gently, like she was going to kiss him on the lips. Everyone was laughing as we eased closer for a better look. Then she squeezed her hands together, putting uncomfortable pressure on his ears, and pulled him backwards till he lost balance. You're terminated, fucker. She snarled to spotty applause from the group as the F local careered into the station with a clatter that drowned out the moment. So that's the end of the book. And the final image is this one, which is a kind of accidental double exposure I'd made getting in New York in probably 1979 or something like that. And I'm going to stop there because it's 5 o'clock. Showing you this will give you a little bit better sense of the exhibition that I organized. As I said, it's totally subjective, and for me to make a selection from all these works I didn't know before and put them together, it has a lot to do with my own sensibility. And so I've shown you something of what that sensibility is. I'll leave a copy of this here if you want to take a look at the book. And questions we can do upstairs if, I'll be up there.
Fantastic.
Okay?
Philip, thank you so much. There's even more fun ahead. Come and join us in the gallery for wine and food and refreshments. And maybe in about around 5:30, the juror will reveal his choices of winners. First, second, and third, and honorable mentions. And some of those people are in the room. So we'll see you up there. And there's a beautiful show catalog available too. See you up there.